I'm just out here roaming around in the old burying ground. I come out here a lot. Well, I have to come up, actually, because I'm buried here in the old burying ground. My name is Kate Stuart, and I've been out here for 91 years, since 1929. But I was born here in Smithville in 1844 and lived for 85 years in the same house I was born in, down on the waterfront, called the Stuart House. It was my mother's boarding house. She came here about 1830 or so. She was a widow, 5 children already. And then I was born in 1844 when she married, after she had married the doctor here at Fort Johnston, Dr. Henry Stuart. So my half-brother and my 4 half-sisters, their last name was Benzel, and I was the only Stuart at the Stuart House. Well, as time went on, I helped my mother at the Stuart House, and my sisters all went off and got married and had children. I was the only one left helping my mother. So when she died, it was me who took over the Stuart House. So that's where I stayed until I was an old lady, like you see me now. But life here in Smithville and Southport, that's what we renamed it in 1887, was a good life for me. I became very active in the civic things that were going on here, and was on the first Chamber of Commerce, and I always had a lot to say, and a lot of times they listened to me. I had a lot of property here in town because I tried to invest what money I was making well. And so things went along very well for me. Not only is my mother and myself buried here, but 3 of my sisters. And over this way, there's a monument to the river pilots. One group of them, a group of 5, who were drowned in 1872. And my half-brother, Joseph Benzel, was one of those river pilots. And his name is among the 5 pilots that are on that memorial. But there's a name missing that was also with them, and that was his 16-year-old son, my nephew, Joseph Benzel Jr. But his mother put up a monument to him as well over here in our family plot just behind me. So we have a lot of family here in the old burying ground. But this is not where we dwelt all the time. There were lots of activities and lots of things going on. Right here beside the old burying ground was the railroad that finally got here in 1911. And I had a lot to do with that because it took us years and years to finally get up the money and the influence that we needed to get a spur of the railroad to come here from Wilmington. And in 1911, on that day when we had our big opening of the station that was just across the street here, I came riding into town on a flat car. And that was a lot of fun for me. Let's see, by that time I was in my 70s, so for an old lady to get to ride a flat car into old Southport was quite a thing. And I was the only woman, of course, that had anything to do with that ceremony that day. The jail that's right behind us over here was on some property that I owned, and we decided in 1904 that we needed to have a jail because we were the county seat. That's why we had so many boarding houses and hotels here in Old Southport, because people were coming here to do business at the courthouse for the county, and alas, we had to have a jailhouse, a better jailhouse, so we built that one in 1904, which was a good thing, and you can visit it today, I understand. When you come over to the cemetery, if it's the day that the jail is open, maybe you can go in there and take a look around. Well, as I wander through the old burying ground here, you know, I can see lots of people that I knew Lots of these names mean a lot to me because I knew them and they knew me. A lot of people all over the state knew me, and a lot of things happened in my life. One of these days I'll tell you more about it. But now I'm going on up here and put these flowers on my mother's grave.
Okay, yay, excellent job, Pat. All right, does anybody have any comments or questions for Pat before we start the next part of the presentation?
Well, I just want to say that I'm beginning to look more and more like old Kate Stewart. There's not much that I have to do to disguise myself anymore.
I think you did an excellent job. Okay, so let's see. I think we're good. If you want to take control and do the presentation.
I'm ready. Yeah. Before I get started, just let me say that I'm going to be, you won't see me up in the corner live, because I'm going to be reading for you from an excellent article that was written about the life of Kate Stewart. So instead of you having to see me with my reflective glasses holding up paper to read, I'll be going away live, and you'll be seeing some pictures that have to do with Kate's life. Now, we're going to try to do that right now. Liz and I have been practicing this so that the technology, we think we have it right. So when you hear me next, I will be reading from this excellent article that was written about 15 years ago. And I'll tell you more about the author. Actually, it was written by Brooks Creek. Some of you may know Brooks. And I'll tell you a little more about her at the end. But I'll be sharing with you the story of Kate Stewart from this excellent article. So here we go. Wish us luck. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm working on the slideshow. It's not quite there yet, but I will get there. Just sing among yourselves.
Sounds like you're constructing something over there, Pat.
Okay. There we are. Everybody good with Kate Stewart, legendary lady of Southport.
All right.
When stories are told about Kate Stewart, one of Southport's most colorful characters of the past, it is difficult to know where truth ends and legend begins. Born August 17th, 1844, at the Waterfront Inn she would occupy for all of her 84 years, this extraordinary woman played host to the rich and famous, as well as to scores of ordinary citizens from all over the country, whose memorable vacations at the Stuart House became an annual pilgrimage. Miss Kate was known as a patron of the arts, a poet, an accomplished educator, a leader in religious and civic affairs, an astute businesswoman, and an innkeeper par excellence. In an era when ladies, especially Southern ladies, were admired for their gentility and femininity, Kate Stuart could hold her own with public officials, attorneys, historians, and politicians. Never one to be intimidated, Miss Kate was said to have discussed politics often and sometimes heatedly with Southport's business leaders. The site for those discussions was likely to be beside an old pot-bellied stove in Watson's Pharmacy, or just as frequently in a comfortable rocking chair on her own wraparound veranda overlooking the Cape Fear River. Kate Stuart inherited an industrious, independent spirit and a head for business from her mother, Mary Elizabeth Garland Benzel. At a time when the role of a woman was usually limited to that of a wife and mother, Mrs. Benzel was forced by circumstance to provide for her family. Her husband, John, died prior to 1842, leaving his widow the sole support of their 5 children. According to some reports, by 1840 and possibly even earlier, Mrs. Benzel had opened her hotel, known then as the Water Skirt Inn, at the river's edge on Bay Street. On November the 10th, 1842, Mary Elizabeth Benzel married Dr. Henry Charles Stuart, a native of Scotland and a chemist at Fort Johnston. Shortly after the birth of their daughter Kate in 1844, Stuart left Smithville, never to return. His departure is still an enigma. Stuart's one known contact with his daughter was a brief note formally written and mailed from Wilmington in 1852, in which he entreated her to attend to her studies. The letter read, "Dear Kate, I have sent you some trifles and beg that you will continue to study as I hear you do by the report of Mr. Brent. My dear child, pay attention to the instructions of your teachers and try to learn to answer my letters. May God bless you and prosper your endeavors, is the prayer of your affectionate father, Charles Stuart." The envelope was addressed to Miss Catherine Stuart. Though she was never known by that name, even her tombstone bears the less formal Kate Stuart. On a paper wrapped around the letter, Kate had written these words, "Only letter ever received from my father." After her husband left, Mary Elizabeth Benzel Stuart continued to run the inn with the aid of her daughters and her servants. Officially named the Stuart House after her marriage in 1842, the inn enjoyed an excellent reputation as Southport landmark until Kate Stuart's death in 1929. It received national attention in later years when it appeared in the 1926 edition of Early American Inns and Taverns. The original one-story brick structure was actually said to have been built in 1772 and was believed by many to have served as a magazine for explosives for Fort Johnston during the Revolutionary War. The massive brick walls were of similar thickness and construction to those of the buildings at Fort Johnston. And while you're looking at that slide, just eliminate the top part and you'll be seeing the original brick building that was there. In 1852, as the success of the inn grew, Mrs. Stuart added a second story topped by a third floor garret with gabled windows, which ran the full length of the building and served as a dormitory-like room. The wide covered porches or piazzas gave the inn the graceful appearance of a Western Indian plantation house. By 1862, much of the burden of assisting her mother with the inn fell to 18-year-old Kate. She helped supervise the staff of maids and waiters and learned quickly about the cooking and selection of menus. The responsibility, no doubt, was enormous for the young woman who had just returned home after graduating with honors from Glen Anna Female Seminary in Thomasville. Here we see an advertisement for the fall session in 1862 that was going to begin. This was the school, the female seminary, as they were called at that time. And this was in the Fayetteville Observer newspaper. So you can see it was pretty inexpensive, or we'll have to be relative about this, probably pretty expensive maybe in 1862. But it's interesting to read what the prices were at that time. Now, the only thing that I'm, in reading this, that I'm a little bit questionable about was the ornamentals were reasonable. Don't know what those were. But anyway, interesting to read from this advertisement that was in the newspaper way back those many years ago. Kate came home at the time when the Civil War was raging. Before the town was occupied by Union troops, the Stuart House was also a spot for social gatherings and musicales attended by many of the servicemen stationed at Fort Johnston and Caswell. One of those guests was Georgia-born poet Sidney Lanier, a Navy signalman stationed for a short time at nearby Fort Johnston. Lanier was an aficionado of great literature, and Kate was known to have an excellent library containing reference books, histories, and novels by the finest writers of that day. So the two had much in common. Kate loved poetry and music, an affinity that was also shared by Lanier. In 1864, Sidney Lanier, while in command of a blockade runner, was captured and imprisoned at Point Lookout on the coast of Maryland. By the time he was released a few months later, Lanier had developed tuberculosis, the disease that would cause his early death in 1881. Kate never saw him again. Along with her duties at the inn, Kate and her friend, Anne Sophie Drew, operated a private school, the Peabody. It was located at the old Potter House on Moore Street. But by 1872, Miss Kate had her own very private school housed in the Masonic Building with an enrollment of slightly less than 100, more than half being females. A roster of her students contained many old Southport names, including those of two of her nephews, one, Edward H. Cranmer, son of her half-sister Almira, who became a Superior Court judge, widely known throughout the state for his wisdom and justice, and his brother, John, who became a doctor and made his home in Wilmington. Life was never easy for Kate Stuart. Destructive storms, hurricanes made costly repairs to the old inn a constant drain on her finances. By the way, this photograph that you're looking at now is still here. This is the Masonic building that's right in front of our current post office. It looks a little different now, but this was basically how it looked when Kate had her school in this building on the bottom floor. Personal tragedy had also come into their lives. In a terrible northeaster of December 1872, her half-brother Joseph and 4 other pilots were lost at sea aboard Benzel's small pilot boat. Joseph's son was also lost with him. Their bodies were never recovered, and after her mother's death on March the 23rd, 1884, the entire burden of running the inn fell to Kate, since all of her half-sisters were married with homes of their own. The picture you're seeing now is the inscription on the pilot's memorial in our cemetery. And the top name there, if you can read it, is her half-brother, Joseph Benzel, who was age 46, and it was his boat that these pilots were on, all 5 of them, plus his son, Joseph Jr. So actually 6 were drowned during this storm on December the 11th, 1872. Kate loved to whistle in the seagulls each morning to feed them bits of stale bread while she savored the beauty of the sea and the sky during an early morning sunrise in the calm after the storms. The seagulls were her pets, and she often gave Captain Harper 2 or 3 loaves of bread to feed them as he made his journeys between Wilmington and Southport. D.W. Manson wrote in February of 1920 in the Wilmington Dispatch newspaper the following: "This is Miss Kate Stuart, owner of the Stuart House. While her hair is silvery white, yet she is quick of step, clear of eye, and keen of intellect. And during the days you will spend in her presence, you will be impressed with her utmost kindly desire to please. Be called upon to follow promptness at meal times, and you will find yourself growing in religious atmosphere, which constantly pervades her presence. And if you are alert, you will come nearer than ever before to the real love of God if you try to emulate her spirit." Captain Alex Hunter, who was a ship's master with the Clyde Lines and a good friend of Miss Stuart, had allowed his daughter Mary to stay at the Stuart House while he went to New York on business. One day during the visit, Kate was startled by loud screams coming from the direction of her pier. Realizing that Mary had fallen overboard, she ran immediately to the spot and jumped in fully clothed to rescue the girl. The current so near the river channel was swift and threatened to pull both of them under. Yet Kate managed to get the unconscious girl to shore, where others were waiting to assist them. The grateful father learned of the rescue upon his return and rewarded Kate with a fine gold watch. The inscription inside reads, "From Alex Hunter to Miss Kate Stuart for her bravery in saving the life of his daughter Mary." For as long as she lived, every Clyde Line steamer that passed her home blew a salute to Miss Kate. She always answered the greeting, waving a white handkerchief by day and a lantern at night. The gold watch has become a family heirloom. Kate Stuart was certainly and constantly involved in the affairs of the community. She was the first president of the Southport Civic Club, which later became the Southport Women's Club. In 1909, members of that group accompanied her aboard the steamer Wilmington with her friend, Captain John W. Harper, at the helm, to hear President Taft deliver an address in Wilmington. In addition to the Civic Club, she was a charter member of the Cape Fear Lodge of the Good Templars and the Methodist Women's Missionary Society. Kate Stuart was devoted to preserving history and was justly proud of her own heritage. The history of North Carolina included her in the biographies of notable North Carolinians, one of the very few women to achieve this honor. Miss Kate was the only female member of the Chamber of Commerce. One of her greatest achievements was securing a rail line from Wilmington to Southport. The day the first train came to Wilmington, the day the first train of the Wilmington, Brunswick, and Southern Railroad entered the small coastal village of Southport, 67-year-old Kate rode into town with it, perched upon a flat car. She even wrote a poem in honor of the event. The first verse of that poem reads, "On Old Rhett Street, each one you meet just shakes hands all around. Well, don't you see? They say with glee, the railroads come to town." When Kate died on April the 13th, 1929, she was mourned across the state as the Grand Old Lady of North Carolina. Her funeral at Trinity Methodist Church was attended by Black and white alike, and a number of her Black friends, at their request, sang hymns for the occasion. Her faithful servant of many years, Joseph Nelson Boise McCoy, was remembered in her will, along with other respected servants, Mary Davis, Sarah Cotton, and John McDonald. Among her pallbearers were friends and notable attorneys from Wilmington. Yet it was the obituary in the April 14th, 1929 edition of the Wilmington Star News that was the most poetic and poignant, and it reads, "The city of Southport today mourns and wears a mantle of mourning, for Miss Kate is no more. Throughout all of eastern North Carolina, there is a pang of regret at her passing. Miss Kate Stuart was more than a woman. She was the most beloved character of her native city, and by way of being something of a Cape Fear institution. To hundreds of seamen, she was a wonderful legend and a kind of earthly angel. Among the epicures of the Carolinas, she was famous, for in the quaint cottage hotel she operated, some of the most celebrated dishes of the coastal country were originated and served. And annually, hundreds of people from all distances enjoyed her marvelous hospitality. For 85 years and some months, or from the moment of her birth until death ended her colorful career yesterday morning, Miss Kate resided in her ancestral home along the picturesque waterfront of Southport. From this vantage point, she observed, and gradually she drew a godly portion of the world into her circle of acquaintances. Her death is a distinct loss to the state. A woman of her type lives but once in a century. The article that I've been reading from was written by Brooks Newton Creek, and Brooks, or Brookie, as I call her, is the great grandniece of Kate Stuart. She, when Brooke was 6 years old, her family moved into the Stuart house and lived there for about a year. And she has always been fascinated with the old inn and stories and legends of Kate Stuart ever since she lived in the house as a child. Kate Stuart's half-brother, Joseph Benzel, who was one of those pilots who died in 1872 or was drowned, was Brooks' great grandfather. So there are a couple of other ladies here in Southport that I know about, Pat Pittenger and Stuart Calary, who are also great grandnieces of Kate Stuart. And I'm sure there are other descendants of Kate's family. In fact, I know there are here in Southport still today. So let's see if you have any questions or if there's anything that I can answer for you about Kate or any of the things that you heard as I was reading that.
Pat, you want to turn your camera back on?
Yeah, I'm going to try to do that. Let's see here. I'm back. Okay. Anybody have remarks or questions or anything you'd like to know maybe a little bit more about Kate before we go away?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have not seen any pictures of a young Kate Stuart, and I know she would have been about 20 during the Civil War where there were photographs taken. Anybody seen a photograph of a young Kate Stuart?
We have not, and we have pretty good resources because family members are still here. And the one we saw right at the beginning of her was probably the youngest one. And by that time, she was probably about 40 years old, I would say. There is one photograph that is in the archives of a young child with a mother. And it has been credited maybe as being Kate and her mother, Mary Benzel. But since that is questionable, we did not include that in that because the thing that made me question it the most, even though I think some of the family members may have thought that this was an authentic photo of her as a child, is that the photograph it's a studio photograph that has the name of the studio, which is up in, I think, Maryland or somewhere like that. And since we pretty well know that Kate and her mother really probably never traveled out of Southport, that probably may be another family member or two members other than Kate. So no, we never see her other than as a fully grown woman, and most of the photos that we have her, she's an old woman. She's an older woman.
I do think that there is one picture of her when she was maybe 18 or 20. Maybe. Let me bring up a picture, see if what you think, because I've seen this labeled as Kate.
Say that again. I'm having a little hard time hearing you.
I do think there is one. Let me just see what you think. this is from a presentation that I read.
Okay.
Have you-
Oh, yes, yes.
That's her.
That's right. Thank you, Liz. That is one of her as a young woman. This is probably about the time that she came back from Glen Anna School, maybe around 20, 25 years old. It's hard to tell through these old photographs of the age, but she certainly looks much younger there. I had forgotten about that one. I'm glad you brought it up. Good, good.
And she looks very athletic there. You know, I kind of think, you know, I always picture that one with her diving off the thing and saving that girl.
Yeah. Well, also, she was a huntress. She liked to go out and hunt small game and shoot birds. So she was not afraid to pick up a gun and go. So I'm sure that she was pretty active gal. And of course, running a big waterfront inn will keep anybody fit, just about running up and down steps and taking care of business. Yeah. I did read in some notes from the article that I read that Brooks wrote that what did happen to the inn after she died. And this is a note that says, upon her death, operations at the inn ceased forever. The property changed hands several times and was used as private residence. That's how Brookie came to live there at one time, and as a rental house. The inn was damaged beyond repair by Hurricane Hazel in 1954. And after that, they just tore the house down because it was irreparable. Anybody else?
I just have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested. I'm a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Yes.
And we give a Sidney Lanier Award in the performing arts.
Wonderful.
So I thought that was very interesting. I kept looking at Sidney Lanier and I thought that name sounds familiar.
and then it came to you, didn't it, Dale?
Yes, exactly.
Well, also there is some talk among the family members and historians that say there could have been a little more of a romantic connection between Sidney Lanier and Miss Kate at that time, because she would have been in her mid-20s at that time. But of course, he was in the service and went on wherever he was going. He was only here for a very short time. And then, of course, he died in 1881, I think it was, after he had contracted tuberculosis. So they never reconnected. And so we could make that into a very romantic tale about love lost, you know.
Was very handsome too.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if we would want to change the name of it to the Lanier House or not. Or if she would have gone away and we would have never known about her.
Right.
She was quite a formidable
Kate would have kept,
person.
I think Kate would have kept the name Stuart House.
Yeah.
Pretty strong little woman, so.
Yes. Okay. Now, a couple of other things, a couple of fun things. My husband has a Black friend who was actually in my living room this morning talking with my husband while I was reading over the article that I just read to you. And when I got to that point where it said that Miss Kate left in her will some money to her faithful servant and employee, Joseph Nelson Boise McCoy, I looked over to the man who was sitting in my living room and I said, Harold, his name is Harold McCoy. I said, Harold, does this name ring a bell with you? And he said, yes, that's my grandfather.
Oh.
So I had sitting in my house this morning, the grandfather of Joseph, or Boise, he was called Boise, McCoy, who was a great friend and worked for Kate Stewart at the Stewart House for many, many years. So that was very interesting. And also, Liz has done a video and a program on Annie Sophie Drew, who was the young lady who started the first school, the Peabody School, with Kate. They were, I think she went to Glen Anna School in Thomasville as well as Kate did. And so when they came back here to Smithville at that time, they decided to open a school. So at some point, maybe you can connect with Liz's rendition of Annie Sophie Drew, Harper. I think she married a Harper. Yeah.
Okay, so if any of you saw the presentation that we did, it was the first Living Voices that we did, and I was in the cemetery with the flag, manipulating the flag. That's Annie Sophia Drew Harper. And the other connection, Pat, that I forgot to mention to you is that, so John Harper, who was very close to Kate Stewart, Captain, John Harper, that was Annie Sophia's brother-in-law.
Oh, yes, yes.
I think he was also married to Kate's niece. So it's all small town. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody was related.
Yes. That's why when you're living in a small town like this, you have to be very careful of what you say to whom, because that could have been an ancestor, a relative, or someone close by. Some of you may not have known about Living Voices before we started doing these several that we've done in our virtual year of 2020. But for several years in the past, we, the Historical Society, have been doing Living Voices in the cemetery. And some of you may have come to some of our Living Voices Day there, where we were dressed up like folks who were underneath the silent stones. And so that's always been a very fun thing for us to do in the society. And so now when I was out at the cemetery at the beginning, when you saw the video, that's sort of the things that we have done for many years. And we're very happy that Liz has the ability, Liz and Bob, to get us on tape and hopefully get, if we can figure out from home what we're doing and what buttons to punch, to be able to show you a little bit of the history in your own home. So we're happy about that.
We're real sad that we couldn't do Living Voices this year in the cemetery, because it is a lot of fun to wander around and talk to all the characters that have come to life. But one of the advantages of this year, because we are doing it virtually, is that we can expand it to some of the other locations. So next month, the Living Voices is going to be done by a woman named Callie Gibbons, and she works on Bald Head, and so she's going to be filming it from Bald Head, and she'll be portraying Rebecca Long, who was the wife of one of the lighthouse keepers there, and who actually worked as a lighthouse keeper unofficially for a little bit too. So that should be a really interesting one. So you want to be sure to see that. And we also are trying to expand to the John Smith Cemetery, which some of you may know is the African-American cemetery that is in Southport. And we have a few people that are interested in portraying characters there. So we're trying to arrange for filming of that, and then we'll put some programs together. So, you know, it's great to be able to do this in person, but it's also kind of nice to be able to expand.
Let me give a little bit of a commercial, if I may. Because of my great interest in the society and my almost 25 years of being here in Southport, I love the old burying ground. And in this year of confinement, I have started doing a Facebook page about some of the stories, like we do in Living Voices, of folks who are buried there in the old historical burying ground. So if you would like to see those, I've done about 9 or 10 of them already. You can go on Facebook to Stories Beneath the Silent Stones. So Stories Beneath the Silent Stones is an ongoing postings about people buried in our cemetery and what their stories are beneath the silent stones.
And Pat does an excellent job. She's an excellent researcher, writer, and also photographer. And she takes wonderful pictures of the cemetery stones and things around there and tells really interesting stories. So definitely check out her Facebook blog. I know a few people came in late after we had finished Pat's portrayal. So as far as I know, this is being streamed to Facebook as we're doing it. So you'll be able to go to our Facebook page afterwards and see that if you missed something. I just wanted to let you know. Anybody have any other questions? Pat, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I think I'm done.
Sure, and check. We have 2 more programs in December. We have our second Tuesday talk will be next Tuesday, because this is the first Tuesday. And Desi Bridge, who is an expert in history and also in culinary arts, is going to be doing a program on, I'll get it right, Christmas dinner during World War II. And she's going to be talking about how people managed to put together Christmas dinner with all the rationing that was going on. And we thought it was rather fitting, as right now sometimes it's hard to get everything you want when you go to the grocery store. So they had it a lot tougher back then. And on the 3rd Monday, so the 21st of December, Mike Royal, our Southport storyteller, will be presenting at 7 o'clock. And Desi's is at 10:30 in the morning next Tuesday. Mike's is at 7 p.m. on the 21st, and he will be talking about a Southport Christmas memory, and he'll be talking about when he was a young boy in Southport in the 50s, 60s, that time frame, and what Southport was like at Christmas time. So a very heartwarming story. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. And also the first Tuesday of January, be sure and see The Living Voices with Rebecca Long. It's a really fascinating story from Baldhead. So any other questions? All right. And once again, I want to thank the Friends of the Library and the library for helping us publicize this. It always helps us get the word out. So thank you very much. And we will see you hopefully next week.